Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I'd like to address you in regards to a way to solve for this persistent problem that keeps happening in America, where we have a government shutdown and then there's this huge problem where people are not getting paid, though they're required to still work, or they're furloughed and they lose their income source. And they would work if they could work, but they're not allowed to because the government, is not operating as it's normally supposed to. And then it becomes this whole thing where Congress uses the plight of these people as leverage in order to make gains in a way that benefits their political ambitions. Fundamentally, this is wrong, and it shouldn't be this way. But unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. But it doesn't have to continue to be that way, and we can solve for that by innovating that problem out. What I'd like to suggest is something that I've worked on for a long time. It's something I've considered. It's always been the thing that's like, this could be a potential resolution that we would need to solve for in cases like this. We don't want the people to suffer. We don't want people to be without means. We don't want people to be expected to do their work but not get fair compensation. The American people should not be suffering because of the dysfunctions of government. And so I think that the best way to approach this is to, in the case of the TSA, is a vital program that we require in order to maintain stability and security and efficiency and viability and keep the vitality of our nation flowing. And it is a critical infrastructure that cannot have any choke points or any inefficiencies or any breakdowns. It has to be robust and resilient and constant. And the same thing goes for programs like FEMA. The only way to have something like that, first of all, aside, totally relevant because it's the underpinnings of all of this, DHS needs to be broken up. It needs to not be this big thing that controls everything, because that concentrated power is exploited. I mean, look at what Kristi Noem was able to, grift from that position. It also makes it weak because you have one big thing that's controlling everything, and, you don't have enough people doing what's necessary to keep checks on everything. The separation of powers is a fundamental principle of America. So separating those into different branches so they can, operate autonomous from other branches, so the interest of one branch doesn't corrupt or compromise, other branches. So break that up. That solves a lot of our problems, doesn't it? But chances are that, we have a budget that's going through, and for whatever reason, whatever justifications, I mean, we can get into the whole, this is, sick and twisted political games that people are playing with people's livelihoods, and in some cases, people's lives. How we elect people that are so deplorable, yes, I'm using that word, to me is just, I can't fathom it. These are not public servants. They're self-interested people playing games. But, with that aside, we can also say that there should never be a point in time where, while they're figuring out these leverages against everything to work out a budget, it should be about constructive dialogue to find, best practices and good outcomes for all parties involved. Congress should be able to do their dialoguing and their debating and their questioning and their wondering and their offerings of negotiating tactics. Yes, do all that kind of stuff. But never should it be a point in time where these critical infrastructures, these critical programs are not being funded, because ultimately it's the people who are working those jobs and the people who are being serviced by those jobs that are suffering. I'm listening to a news report today, and bless everybody who's reporting this, because the information that they're giving is like helping to really gain an honest perspective of all of this. But there's people that wait 9 hours. 9 hours. I mean, you know, like traditional labor, that's a whole day's worth of work that you have to miss to stand in a line to get on a plane that might be a flight hop for an hour. You know what I'm saying? Not reasonable. And then all of these TSA workers, some of them have to not work because they just cannot feasibly afford to work. You know? Some of them are just like, I don't work for free. You know? And understandable. Like, everybody has their reasons, but many of them are just like devoted servants, and they've been through these types of things before where they've had to work without pay, and it's hard for them. And we are placing an unnecessary, repeat that, unnecessary burden on them. And then you're complicating the lives of everybody that depends on these public servants doing their job and doing it well and being empowered to do their job. And right now they're being disempowered because they're not being paid. And look at the negative outcome consequences for that. The repercussions are felt across the board. And it's not just the people that are in those positions, but it's also the people who miss their flights and were supposed to get to their job. They're messing up our businesses and our industry. They're ruining relationships. They're making it so people can't make their connections, or they are ruining people's lives, their relationships, their business relationships, their capacity to do business, like our, you know, packages being sent aren't being sent right. Like, all of these things are a problem. And it's all the point of contention being that the TSA is not being paid. And instead of letting that be, you know, this desperate situation that turns into a leverage that people in Congress can fight over, you know, to be able to get their way shoved through, it's like, do this, sign this SAVE Act that nobody wants, otherwise, you know, I'm going to hold that ransom TSA pay. And then I'm going to blame you for it, saying, like, if you just would sign, you know, Democrats, just, if you would sign the SAVE Act that nobody wants, you know, this terrible thing that would not otherwise be able to get through if not, you know, we were threatened and ransomed to do it, you know, it would never get through. But we're going to take the thing that actually matters to you, you know, the livelihoods of all these people, and then the actual functionality of our transportation system. We're going to leverage that vulnerability, that desperation that we've created for you against you to force you to sign something you never otherwise would have done. This is extortion. It's wrong, fundamentally. But again, the whole point is that we need to make sure that the people in TSA and the people in FEMA are paid, you know. And I think that definitely needs to be separation from, again, separating DHS, breaking it up, because it's important to break up that concentration of power, because it should be separate from ICE. ICE has some splaining to do. It really needs to, you know, we need to take a good, hard, long look at that in isolation to deal with that, because it is a real problem. And obviously it's a problem because they've killed American citizens and beat the heck out of many others. Traumatized and terrified children, innocent bystanders, and has eroded the integrity of our First Amendment and Second Amendment rights, and has turned into this paramilitary force that is normalizing the government imposing itself upon you as an American citizen, taking away your freedom, your rights, your liberties. Obviously, we need to deal with that, separate and in isolation. And Congress's good work needs to be about breaking up DHS. That is the fundamental thing. But right now, to solve for this problem, we need to get, you know, all of these people paid. And we need to do so in such a way that this doesn't happen again. And so what I suggest, it's something I've suggested before, it would have been a great thing to resolve for the problems that happened during COVID where people weren't able to get paid. And it's in terms of creating an auxiliary economic system that we can shift into in times of, you know, contention or complications, or, you know, Congress can't get their act together, to make sure people still get paid. And that is operating off of a digital currency structure that allows for them to continue to get paid in this format, And then when the incentive for Congress to get their act together as soon as possible, because the sooner they do it, the less they have to pay in the cumulative interest of sorts to repay back that system. Because that system by default is going to happen because we ain't going to let people go without pay. Period. It's the point of the exercise. Make sure these people are able to do their jobs and do it well, and they are provisioned, accommodated, supported, and stewarded and cared for to make sure they can do what they do best and not have to worry. Peace of mind, right? In all circumstances, they're going to fare well. They're going to be able to do their thing. And nobody's going to have to suffer the consequences of these people not being able to fare well because they just should, and they would and they could, but they can't because Congress decides that they don't want to get their act together. They want to ransom these people's lives as collateral to be able to get their craziness passed in Congress. No. Congress should not have that power. So an auxiliary economy would be able to shift into that mode when we have like a point of contention where Congress says we can't put we can't put through a budget to be able to pay, we need to argue those finer points out. Well, now it allows to make sure these people get paid. There's an auxiliary system, and then it puts Congress on the line of you need to shorten the distance between, where you say you aren't going to fund this and when you actually do fund this, because now instead of it being the, people not getting paid as your leverage point is reducing the amount of interest that you're going to have to pay. And guess what? You're going to have to pay it. And I think this should come on the terms of Congress should have to have some stake in the game to help to incentivize them personally to help to resolve for this as well. How that exactly works out, I think, we really need to put in terms of, questioning whether or not Congress should have certain types of allowances, which, something similar to the lines where, airlines are right now taking away the perks from Congress because it's like, dude, we're not going to incentivize you, give you something special because you guys are the ones who are ruining it for everybody right now. We're taking that perk away from you. Something like that gives an extra added leverage of incentive for Congress to get their act together and do the right thing, and then make them come to the table and actually have like logical, arguments about this. Funding TSA, funding, FEMA has nothing to do with the SAVE Act. Even funding ICE has nothing to do with the SAVE Act. Why are they bringing that in? Because Donald Trump says that that's what he cares about the most? And he's trying to aggressively force people into this control drama nobody wants to be in. No. He shouldn't be able to ransom and extort and threaten, no. And so creating this auxiliary economy makes sure everybody's still taken care of. Everybody's still getting paid, but, it's going to actually cost us, more in terms of like how Congress is going to be able to work out the negotiation. They have to now also consider the daily interest that's racking up, that they're going to have to reconcile into their budget as well. So that eats into it. And it shouldn't be eating into, how much these programs would get, but eating into something that is a part of an incentive package that they benefit from personally. And so it puts them on the hook, to do the right thing. But not in the sense of where it's like rush to do something without thinking it through, because there should be an incentive to make sure you actually understand the bills that you're passing. Requirement, you have to read it. That's why laws should be short, sweet, to the point, easy to read, and you shouldn't be able to combine a bunch of things to shove a bunch of stuff through that wouldn't otherwise get through. It's a fundamental distorted corruptibility, and it's not of integrity, and our system should not work that way. Calling out that bullshit. Excuse my language. But also the idea of making sure that when Congress is in session and they're arguing the fine points and negotiating, like, how are we going to best work together to guide the nation to move forward in a way that's going to suit the best interests of everybody involved? It should be based off of understanding that everybody is going to be impacted by this. Understand the relevant stakeholders and listen to them. Listen to your constituents. Listen to those people who are going to be the most impacted. And really consider those people when you make your decisions. Not special interest groups and lobbyists that come in and whisper in your ear to say, do this and it's going to benefit you somewhere down the line. Job when you leave government, or, some sort of investment stake or something to the effect. Like, we should prevent those sorts of things from being able to happen. Also prevent insider trading for Congress, because that's just out of hand right now, especially due to recent events. But the idea is to break up the inefficiencies in the systems, remove, create corrective mechanisms that, solve for the corruptibility of the system, and to reinforce and shore up the weaknesses that turn into breakdowns in the system that lead to us having these prolonged issues. Where we're on day 40, 41 of the partial government shutdown. And, this isn't in our best interest to have things continue to go on this way, and Congress is not focusing on the things that matter and taking care of this stuff. I mean, ultimately, this is a fundamental issue of the Democrats saying we need to have, some sort of restorative corrective mechanism to solve for the fact that ICE has gotten out of control. And Republicans are like, no, we want ICE to have all of this power and this control because they like what ICE is able to do under the orders of Trump to be able to work out his agenda. And, I think that many people want to break ICE up and dissolve it and it not exist anymore. I fundamentally believe ICE can be made nice, and it should be. But it's not going to do that unless it's a very public, transparent, intentional act of restoring public trust in that system and in that program. And the only way to do that is to make sure these people are actually qualified, make sure these people are actually vetted, make sure these people are actually trained. We already have so much problems of corruptibilities in our law enforcement system that allow people to get through the cracks that should not be given the legitimacies of authority of power. And many of these people are conducting, enforcements that they are not trained to do. And because of those sorts of things, bad outcomes happen all of the time. It's on the daily and in the regular, and that should not be normalized. We should be solving for that problem, But to allow ICE to just give $50,000 bonuses for randos off the street that were a part of the January 6th insurrection to come and mass themselves up and be able to carry large arsenal of weapons on them and roam the streets and intimidate people and pull people out of their cars and break their windows and do vandalism and violence against people and to murder people, kill people in the streets without consequence or repercussion. No. These sorts of things shouldn't happen. We need to put a stop to that, and that's the whole point of having these types of discussions. But that, problem with ICE should not be stopping us from being able to make sure that FEMA's working, because guess what? Hawaii's going through a big problem right now with their flooding, and they're going to need a lot of help. We just had recent tornadoes go through, many parts of the East, and those communities need to be restored to wholeness. And we need to make sure there's full funding and, full resource allocation to help those people to be deployed to, be responsive to the needs of the American people without delay, without politics getting in the way. This is in the interest of the American people, and to make sure everybody is well and restored to wholeness. And that's priority. And that cannot be held back by, these political games from some other thing. Again, break up DHS. It serves no purpose for it to be just this big blanket umbrella, program. And choose better leaders. I cannot express with enough heartfelt frustration of the newly, appointed head of DHS. This man is fundamentally a liability to the American people. This person cannot keep the American people safe. This person believes in outcomes that are disfavorable to whole populations of people. And now he's a decision maker that has authority to determine outcomes for people who he has personal bias in a negative sense to. That's not right. He's not an expert in any regard to be able to perform the tasks that are necessary for that position. It was transferring one corrupt, self-centered, power-hungry, drunk on power person, that was self-serving and self-enriching moron with another one that is just in their own way extreme and ridiculous. And so, maybe there should be a requirement in Congress to not just let any willy-nilly person come through, but somebody in those types of positions have to meet a bar standard. You cannot even get a job at McDonald's flipping fries unless you have some, credible sense that you can perform the task. This person's resume, just because they have done things and they are an accomplished person, doesn't mean they're going to be able to do the job and do it well, because there's a certain level of expertise that job does require. And the person who's in that role was in it before, and the person who is in it now do not meet those standards. We should have standards. And I think if we made that be a requirement, and that the American people have a say in it as well. So you can't just have a president that comes in and implants and installs loyalists who are just going to do whatever he wills and wants, to achieve his regime's agenda, because we can all agree when we look at it, it's not serving the best interests of the people, because he's not even fulfilling his campaign promises. He's letting everybody down. He flat out lied to them, and now he's laughing in their faces. This man does not care about you, And so anybody that is aligned with his agenda and accomplishing that effectively is saying, I'm not here to serve you. I'm not here to care for you. I'm here to defer to Donald Trump, and whatever he says he wants, I was going to do. And I'm going to do it at any ends needed, and whatever, means necessary. Even if it means resorting to violence and American people die. Even if it means that, we can spend a bunch of money on worthless crap that doesn't actually add value to the American people or result in outcomes that help to shore up our weaknesses. It does nothing to actually serve for the preamble promise, of the Constitution. It doesn't do any of those things. It ultimately only serves Donald Trump and his interests and whatever he's been convinced of. If you do this thing, it's going to work out for you. Great. These are bad things. So ultimately, my heart, I've just been thinking about the TSA agents and how stressful their jobs already are, and everything that they're going through in terms of having to work without pay, listening in part about some of the stories of the people of just how stressful it is. They have families that they have to feed, and they have to pay their bills, and they've been going over a month. It's been over a whole month's pay that they've lost. And think back in the full total government shutdown that happened, closer to the beginning of the year, what happened there, so many more people were impacted. What happened in, right before Christmas, so many people were suffering and impacted because government shut down. All of those things, have we forgotten how terrible it was for people, and how we were just this shouldn't be the case? But yet again, here we are again. And we just wouldn't have to do that if we had an auxiliary system that made sure these people got paid. Because they're doing their work, man. And we want them to be able to be at their best. And the only way to do that is if they don't have to care about what Congress is doing, whether Congress is doing their job. In order for these people to do their job. They should be able to just have peace of mind that they're doing right by the American people. They're fulfilling their public service. They're doing their job, and they're doing it right. And they ain't got a stress in the world, because they know they're getting paid for the good work that they do. Their work is seen, is appreciated, it's valued, it's supported, it's cared for. And they just keep doing their job. And they keep getting paid. Mind you, through this auxiliary system that then government has to pay back, And the financing in the budget is just about reconciling to repay that system. And the reasoning why we should have a system like this is because, again, in the case of something like a pandemic happens again, which it's going to happen, terrifying to think that it might happen with Trump in office or somebody like that, God help us. But in those sorts of cases, we would have an auxiliary system to pivot into, to be able to work from, to keep the, flow of economics going, in a reserve, comfortable conservation. It just can't be this crazy excess, because we know we have to pay it back in time, and then it should be a system that we can pay forward into to, bring a reserves, a rainy day fund that we can extend to lessen the impact in terms of what we have to pay back in the future. Because anything we have to pay back in the future, if we pay in it now, let's say, just a number, pay in $1 million now, and we end up using $2 million when we depend on it, and we have to diverge into that auxiliary path of economics. When we come out, we only have to pay $1 million at the future rate, which will be higher because you can't stop inflation. So it will actually save us money to invest into it, with the hopes that we wouldn't have to go above that. But if we do, we know we have to pay it back, but we only have to pay back that smaller portion. So we pay ourselves forward, in investing into that. And it could be in the form of not just money, but also innovations that help us to be strategically deploy innovations that help to solve for the fact that, this is a problem. Like, for instance, having, micro infrastructure, energy battery storage systems that you can deploy to neighborhoods that can run the systems for people in those areas to help to kind of offset some of the cost of power usage for those places, under distress at that time. Could also go towards places that, have energy infrastructures broken down. Deploy those to lessen the burden, so that when we do pull from the system to pay for the other part of the electric bill, we're only paying for a smaller amount, because we have lessened the amount of the money that would have to pay out by this innovation solving for the inefficiencies or the higher costs. It's offsetting it. So you can do things like that to be able to solve for it, to make it so it's lessening. And then we can utilize those systems to solve for a lot of those problems. And in a way, it's, not focusing on so much the money cost, but also the human cost of reworking our systems so we do less in this area, but we emphasize deploying people in different areas that help us to, get ourselves in a more functional state. So, like, people that were frontline workers at grocery stores were really important during the pandemic, but there were office workers that weren't able to go to the office, so those people could have been redirected into those types of roles, so that they're still being productive and they're still earning, their way of life, by their own fruits of their own labor, sort of thing. But it's in a different system that they can be deployed to, so they're still doing something and not just sitting home and doing nothing. So we're not losing out in those systems. Like, there are things that we can do to just shift roles, shift what we depend on, shift systems. Again, all these auxiliary ways that we can go about doing stuff until we can work our way back into the legacy, economics, when everything is working optimally as it's supposed to be. And maybe when we come back into the legacy economics, we realize, man, there was a way this system was functioning before. There was actually an inherent weakness in the system. And because we were in this auxiliary, role, we were able to, work out, innovate out that problem. So when we, converge back into this, legacy system, that problem's actually innovated out. We don't have that problem anymore, and we can do that through, innovations and different forms of education, different types of leveling people up to perform certain roles and tasks in society to solve for that. But the whole point of the exercise, the whole point of all this should be to make sure that we are doing right by the people and doing right by the world, caring for the people, making sure they're living the good life, living with the peace of mind that everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be all right. And then let the inner workings of governance of how to orchestrate, organize, institutionalize, substantiate, empower, enable, fund, whatever, the programs that make this all work. That's the government's thing, and it should be done in a system that, when the impact happens, it'll happen in a way that's restorative not destructive like it is right now. You know, again, it can't be a leveraging the suffering of Americans, which is what's happening right now, in order for Congress to advance, you know, some selfish program that doesn't even work in the best interest of Americans, you know? And so working out that corruptive part of the system, and then make it sure that, like, we are intentionally working towards, with what we have, to find the best practices to move forward that's going to, you know, innovate out inefficiencies in our systems, create an establishment and restoration of integrities, to always reconform back into the law, and to establish ethical bounds, and really start pointing out the moral legitimacies of the people that we are entrusting to make decisions on our behalf. You know, people in government should be public servants, not self-serving, selfish deviants. You know what I'm saying? And so this helps us to weed out those unlikelies, because it makes it very transparent. And we need to establish a system that operates that in that way, but also in such a way that empowers the American people to do something about it besides just voting, because voting is very important, very, very important. I will never discredit voting. And I think that our entire system should be integrated into mail-in ballots, because then we don't have, you know, ballot box problems ever again. There's a way to shore up any perceived inherent, you know, whatever weaknesses or vulnerabilities of that system, make it robust. And I think it's the best way to move forward. But, you know, then you don't have people standing in polling lines forever, where they could be intimidated by ICE showing up and, you know, scaring the bejesus out of people just because, like, why are you here? You know, like, this is supposed to be a free and fair election, and I'm not feeling it's very, you know, free if I have to be under your watchful eye, you know, with your guns and, you know, your bulletproof vests, puffed out chests, thinking you're badass or something. Like, no, like, I shouldn't be intimidated at the polls like that. But transitioning to a mail-in ballot system across the board would be ideal. But we could work out, you know, how that could work in such a way where it's not like, you shouldn't have to, like, give the threat of, like, everybody else suffering in order to pass, you know, legislation in regards to improving the voting system. Like, if your plan is so undesirable that the only way to get it passed is through some sort of threat of harm or the forced suffrage of other people, like, your plan ain't right, you know? Nobody else should have to struggle or suffer in order for you to use as leverage in order to advance something that is fundamentally not in the best interest of the American people. You know, there's a lot of these problems that we have, and, like, you know, we should want for, and government should be working towards, you know, provisioning, accommodating, stewarding, supporting, and caring for the American people to achieve the preamble promise, you know, of the Constitution, and to do so in such a way that works out mutually beneficial, you know, for everybody, and does so in such a way that brings the American people into, you know, the stakeholder negotiating process, but doesn't make them, like, the ones that get abused and harmed out of this. Like, they should be the ones that are always protected, you know, and the people who are taking in the responsibilities of, you know, the ones who have the most to lose should be the people who are the decision makers, because then it puts them in a spot of, like, you better make sure that you're doing right by the people. Because if you ain't doing right by the people, it's going to come back to you, and it ain't going to be nice. So really think about what you're doing. Is this right for all parties involved? Is this based off of truth? You know, is this going to lead to goodwill and better friendships? These sorts of things. Like, fundamentally, we have to really think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, you know, and to always default to making sure that the people are taken care of. America should work for everyone without the disadvantage of anyone, so that nobody gets left behind or kept behind and everybody lives the good life. And right now, if you think of what's happening to FEMA and to the people who need FEMA, and you think of what's happening with TSA agents and the people who rely on the TSA agents, a lot of people are being left behind, kept behind, They're suffering. They are being de-incentivized from living a normal life, pursuing their happiness. Their rights and their liberty are being infringed. This is resulting to bad outcomes for the American people. And, that shouldn't be the case. They should know to be able to, rest their head on their pillow at night and just know that everything's going to be all right. The government's doing their job to figure out, the logistics and the funding and all these sorts of, they're figuring it out. They're doing their thing. They're figuring it out. In the meantime, I'm still going to be able to make my way and do my thing. We're going to keep things moving. Things are going to be functional. And then when we come out on the other side of this, whatever the, people in government have figured out is the best way to proceed forward through, however they've negotiated terms and conditions, we're going to come to the point where the American people and what the government's offering are going to have to come to an agreement. All right, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to be from now on moving forward. And we all just kind of assume a consensus responsibility for that, to take ownership of it. Knowing that, had we done things differently, we probably wouldn't have to pay out so much, in the aftermath. And maybe there's potential for us to innovate out problems that redeem the time and actually saves us money in the long run. There's so much opportunity to work with it if we're being constructive about it, instead of using, government funding as a means to, conduct harm against the American people, and then for, political games to harness that, concern to establish, orders of the government to make us, have to live in the consequences of their decision making and programs that we wouldn't have otherwise have chosen for ourselves. Fundamental problem with all that. We need to have negotiations and things like that, but I don't think that human beings' lives and well-being should ever be able to be leverage points. So my heart goes out to all of the people who are suffering right now and the outcome consequences of bad decision makers, who are, being not doing their jobs. It's fundamentally wrong. And we got so many more fish to fry in this regard. Congress should right now be advancing a bill to break up DHS. Congress should right now be advancing a bill that establishes an auxiliary economy for us to shift all payments into, so that, our critical, vital programs will continue to be funded, even as funding, negotiations for appropriations, can and must occur. And then to establish integrities in our systems of governments that prevents, the hijacking of systems and the leveraging of human suffering. We should be solving for the intractability of problems, not creating problems that then, disadvantages certain people so that they can be exploited by the powers that be, that say, oh, you want these people to get paid? Well, you better fall in line with my interests over here, otherwise those people are going to continue to suffer, and we're going to blame it on you, because that's what's happening right now. How is that right? It's not. Fundamentally wrong. And if the American people had a seat at the table, these sorts of things wouldn't happen. This is why we have to have a, civics branch of government, so that they can sit at the table and say, no, that's not how we play. My interests, I'm a relevant stakeholder. My interests will be heard. It will be considered on the merits, and you will be making your decisions based off of the fact that I say no to that, or I say yes to that, whatever the case may be. And giving the American people that type of agency also makes them feel like, I have skin in the game, and giving an auxiliary economy, I have, stake, and I have, something to fight for. Imagine how many more people would vote if they knew that their vote wasn't just about picking, whatever candidate happens to be running, but also their vote meant that they were empowering their own government leverage. A civics branch of government gives all the American people leverage in the government, right? We can create work in the system that creates movement, you know? And when you elect people who are in line with the type of work that you want to be able to do, man, that's a huge leverage, because, you know, representational government represents all their constituents and all relevant stakeholders that can be pulled together from other constituencies, from different states and whatnot. And so it's kind of like, what is it, you know, collective bargaining sort of thing, so that you can pool all that together, of the individual making their vote and leveraging it, the representative leveraging everybody, the collective in that area, and then leveraging the collective pooling of other states together, so that when we actually are trying to enact change, it's representing the will of the people. The people are a part of the process, and we're all working together to help to leverage something to be able to make the type of change that we want to see. And when people know that that's what they're doing, they're going to vote for people not based off of, you know, some hollow promises and platitudes and some campaign rally or whatnot. It's literally going to be about, does this person have the capacity to be reasonable? You know, are they just? Are they fair? Are they reasonable? Right? Do they have good jurisprudence? Are they a sensible person? You know, are they going to be somebody that I can go to and say, you know, listen, I need you to understand why this is important to move things in this direction. And they're going to be responsive to that, you know, and they're going to work hard to figure out, like, okay, really, is this in the best interest of everybody, you know, and then formalize the correct language and legal representation to create laws that serve the interests of the people, you know, and you vote for people who are able to enhance your own leverage that you have in government. You know, that changes the nature of the game, doesn't it? And it also gets different types of people to want to be able to run for government. You know, we also have to solve for the problem of, like, government is really only feasible for people who have a bunch of money, and that Citizens United really disenfranchises regular everyday Americans. You know, I was just looking at a news report today that reflected the difference between what the RNC and the DNC bring in terms of funding. And it's actually quite remarkable that the Democratic Party is able to make so many moves with such little funding, like thrift, you know. I love that. It's a virtue, right? But massive amounts of money go into the RNC, and all these people got to really show for their work and like the difference they've made in people's lives is they've made America more hostile and angry and pissed off and divisive and factioned, you know, disenfranchise lots of people, you know, make people hate each other, and, you know, fomenting and festering and led to suffering of people and people feeling betrayed because the government told them one thing and then gave them another. And like all of the resources that they have, all they've managed to like create an outcome from that is like some really shitty, excuse my language, situations that people have to live in the outcome of. People are suffering because of what the Republican Party is doing to the American people. You know, I don't think the Democrats have it all together quite yet, but at least what they're like, you know, the one constant thing that I hear in what they're trying to accomplish, all of the people who have succeeded at getting elected in the Democratic Party recently, is these are people that are trying to do things for you. For you. Fundamental difference between doing something to you and doing something for you. You know what I'm saying? And they care. And so I think there's something that can be done with that can help the Democratic Party, especially if, man, it would be amazing to be able to prove that with, you know, comfortable conservation, prudence, and thrift, you can really change hearts and minds, and it doesn't take very much to get a profound amount of change done, because, you know, it's not how much you have, it's what you're about, you know. It's not, you know, what you got, but what you get from what you give, sort of thing. And I think they can take on that type of capacity and really like show up and show out in that regard. And all of the candidates who have been winning recently, especially the ones that flipped seats, like what's her name? Emily Gregory, I think is her name, in Florida, in the flip in the district, the Mar-a-Lagos, and I think it's just so delightful. I wish her all of the best. There was another flip seat in the state Senate in Florida as well for Democrats from Republican, and that was just totally amazing. Like, to see that type of movement and people recognizing, like, the Republican Party are like a bunch of selfish deviants that are going to do things to you, and you don't really like the outcomes because they're kind of screwing you over. At least the Democrats are saying, man, we care about you and we want to make a difference, and we're gonna work hard to make that happen. You know, we may be limited because we don't have the control, but the more you vote for us, the more power we have and the more we can do for you. So vote for us, right? But it's amazing to see what they can do with such little resources. Like, it makes me proud when I think about it. And, you know, more power to them and success. I honestly, where I sit in the political spectrum, I'm not a part of any party affiliations, but I'm really more about, I don't care about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I care about the responsible party. Who's going to take responsibility? You know, who's going to take extreme ownership and help to work out, you know, get us out of this mess that we're in. That's what I'm for. That's what I'm about. That's what matters to me, you know. And I think I can transcend the barriers of those political parties and be able to unite people to the common cause of just, like, let's do right by the people and the world, you know. America doesn't have to, like, stop trying to be great, but you can't be great if you fail to do good. So if you do good, then guess what? Probably by default, you're going to be great. It's pretty great when you do good, right? Like, you feel great when you do a good thing, right? But when you do something that's wrong or something that's bad, you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel resentment, you know. You have all this bad karma following you. It's a totally horrible situation. And we're in the midst of that now, and all those consequences or negative outcomes, you know, and everything's spectacle and craze. Like, every day you wake up and there's more drama, trauma, craze, and control, and, you know, bad outcomes, and, you know, some more people are suffering and, you know, because of other people's decisions, and it's just terrible, you know. How exhausting it must be for people to have to cover this whole mess, you know. It's exhausting for me to have to even follow it. I want the American people, to everybody, just to wake up every single day and be like, today's gonna be a good day. Man, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to give my best, I'm going to do my best, and in return, you know, I'm going to have some amazing experiences. I'm going to feel good, it's going to feel right, you know, I'm going to make new friendships, I'm going to do good, I'm going to be of service, I'm going to make a difference, you know, I'm going to change the world, you know, I matter because I'm here and I'm showing up, you know, and I'm involved. And I'm a part of something that's much bigger than myself, you know, and really, like, coalesce around the idea of the American identity is about, you know, doing right by the people and doing good for the world, and doing it in such a way that, like, we consider ourselves the good guys again. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want that for us so much. You know, and to break away from the, like, oh, infighting with one another and, like, hating one another. Like, no, man, we don't really actually hate each other. Like, many of us are, like, you know, feel pity and disappointment, and we may, like, be disgusted and repulsed by people, but, like, fundamentally I don't think it's hate. There are some people that do hate, and those are just hateful people. They're deviants, you know. They just have it in for the world that, you know, they got to treat everybody in this terrible way. But there's fewer of those people than you really think. I think that they bring out the worst in other people, and otherwise good people are influenced to be their worst version because of those few bad actors. But, you know, when you isolate those and kind of remove them from the equation, and you get these people that, like, are doing the wrong thing right now, they're messing up and they're screwing up and they're being assholes, excuse my language, separate them from those bad people and get them around good people, and man, the goodness within those people shine. and I think there's so much potential for that, especially people that were, like, really hardline for MAGA, because it was like, oh, we're a part of something that's going to make a difference and we're going to set things right. But that really didn't pan out that way, and, you know, it started making people do and say things they wouldn't otherwise do, and it was bringing out the worst in them. And, you know, it took, some people are waking up in the past, and, you know, some came sooner than others to the realization that, wow, this really wasn't what it said it was going to be, and I went all in on it, enthusiastically because I thought it had so much hope and promise, but it really was not something that was conducive to my well-being. And now I'm like living in the regret of, man, I probably shouldn't have devoted myself to something that is just really unworthy of my true value. Really led me astray from my soul print values, really led me to do the wrong thing. I did wrong by people that I cared for. I was hostile and, cruel and mean. And when you take all of that influence away, where they're reinforcing that structure that says it's okay, and you just look at your normal person every single day, like, you wouldn't do that. If you saw a little old lady trying to cross the street, you wouldn't go up to her and say, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Because that's going to, be the distinguishing factor of whether or not I'm going to give you the help that I see that you need. Instead, it should just be like, this person needs help. I can be of assistance in this way. I'm going to take a little bit of time out of my day to be there for this person in the ways that they need, and I know I can show up and be of service. And I'm going to do that because it's right by that person. And then somehow that person is going to be able to do good for somebody else because I was able to empower them with the capacity to do for somebody else something that I couldn't do. You're paying it forward. Good karma. And it's not about otherisms. It's about us. When the I and the you becomes a we, and it stands for something that like distinguishes us as this like, total involvement with one another, and we're involved in like good relationship building with one another. And there's so much room for that can help to bring people away from the political factioning that we've had. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, especially once we start establishing a civics branch of government, less people are going to be about fighting with each other over differences and really focusing on, our similarities, the things that we can relate to, and giving people like, compassion and patience and, distance if they need it, so they can work out their lives in a way that doesn't like just, mess up your own life or, other people's lives, and give everybody just a little bit of patience, understanding and whatnot, so that, especially for the fact that people have making a lot of mistakes, misplacing trust in aligning with MAGA, it's going to take a lot of intentional redemption of that. And it shouldn't be in such a way where like we make them feel bad about the mistakes that they made. Like, just be grateful that they now have come to their senses. Good on you, man. I'm so glad that you understand now. And it's not about you're wrong or you're right. It's like, it was a mistake. And how do we come into alignment now just to do the right thing from here? What next needs to be done that's going to be the right thing and move in the trajectory that diverges from that bad, continuum that you were on. Wake up one day, start doing things differently, moving in a different direction. I think that that's what's most important, especially when you think about what can be done by every single person. Like, no one person can do everything, but everybody can do something. And this gives people the empowerment of sense of like, the one thing that you can do, that everybody can do, is to like be good humanity. You know what I'm saying? Focus on the good so the good can get better. Recognize it is impossible to make great if you don't do good. So just do that. Do good. Like, if somebody needs a smile for the day, give it to them. It's a magical power. It's infectious. Somebody needs a nice compliment. I love giving people compliments. Compliments are empowering, and empowers the righteous side of somebody's ego, and it helps them to bolster up their independent confidence. It's a reflection, a reassurance, like, your effort was recognized, valued, and appreciated. Keep up your good work. And then it helps them to just keep reinforcing it's worth it. I'm worthy. I matter. I'm here. This is what it's all about, for me to show up and show out, and it gives them encouragement to do better the next day. And it's a positive reinforcing system. And it reminds me, great story. I'll finish on this. I was at the store the other day, shopping, and I saw this young lady. She was just beautiful. Very, very beautiful. She had this like delightful, very intentional outfit that she set up. It was abstract and it was different. It was colorful and it was brave, and her accessories were delightful. Her hair was very well done. Her makeup was very nice. And I mean, everything from head to toes down to her shoes. She was just beautiful. And I told her this. I was like, oh, I love your outfit. You look amazing. You're radiant today. And those are the types of compliments I like to give people. And they're always genuine. They're always authentic. I see the beauty in people. I accentuate it and I compliment it. And she was like, paused for a second, like, me? Oh, thanks. You know, like, thank you. Okay. And I can tell, I sensed it. I felt her energy. Whew, confidence boost. Like, I do look nice, don't I? And continued shopping and went down another aisle, and she happened to be down this aisle too. And she passed by another lady who was shopping, and I saw that lady from a distance, like, ooh, I like her jacket. That's super cute. And I watched this lady who didn't see me turn to that lady and say, I really like your outfit. And I sensed it was just like, she was like passing it on, passing along the kindness, you know, pay it forward sort of thing. The lady wasn't as receptive. So I was like, I almost wanted to go to the lady that I complimented and say, don't give up. There are going to be a lot of people that reject your kindness because, like, they don't know how to receive. They're so closed off, they don't know how to receive. It's not an indication of you doing something wrong. It's there's something within that person that just hasn't been opened up yet. It's going to take a little bit of time to break down those walls that they have because people don't know how to relate with one another anymore. It's sad. But I just like sent her energy. It's like, come on, like, don't give up. It's the right thing to do. Like, that was so kind of her to say that. And I could tell she like meant it, you know, and it was the same vibe she was trying to pass forward that I gave to her. And it was just like good humanity, you know, let's cultivate and foster that with one another, you know. But it made me so happy and so proud because it gave me hope. It's like one small act of kindness, one act of goodwill is all it takes to spark another and another and another. And then all of a sudden it's sparking throughout everybody, and everybody's lifting their vibration to that level. And we're on that frequency where we're all seeing each other on that level of excellence, you know, good humanity, you know, job well done, proud of you. I see your effort, A+, you know. And it just opens people's hearts and their minds, and they will never forget it, you know. They may not remember what you said, and they may not remember what you did, but they will always remember the way you made them feel. And so the next time somebody else makes them feel that way, it reinforces that within their minds and their hearts, and it establishes for themselves, like, that is the right thing to do. That is good humanity. I like feeling that way. I want more of that. Where can I find it? Where are the people that feel that way too? You know? And who can I help to make feel that way too? In an honest and authentic way. Again, this young lady who I complimented seemed like out of character. Like, she didn't know how to be kind and compliment somebody else, but she saw it role modeled from me, and then here she is playing it out in her life. Very short time, you know, it came very fast after she experienced it from me. She's trying to offer it and pay it forward to somebody else. It seemed a little awkward for her, and she gave it up to somebody else who wasn't really receptive to it because it was a little awkward for her. Like, what do you mean my jacket's nice? You know? And so it was an awkward exchange, but it broke their normal tendencies. It broke them awake from their sensibilities that, you know, I'm just autonomously working through my life and I'm not relating with the people around me, and it made them relate to people outside of themselves. Opened up their worldview. And I pray and I hope that that young lady tried again. You know, somebody else other than that lady. And I hope that lady that she complimented, in her mind, went home and was like, you know, maybe I should have said thank you at the very least to that young lady instead of like, you know, shoving her off. And now that breaks her open It's going to sit with her and be like, man, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, but I didn't. So I'm going to care next time. And somebody else does that to me again, I'm going to respond in a better way. And maybe it will inspire her to be complimenting to somebody else, because it reminds her of like, well, I could have taken from that experience instead of the negative, don't talk to me, or like, oh, what do you mean, sort of thing, and instead embrace it as like a kindness, be like, it actually feels kind of good for somebody to say, I recognize your good efforts. Good job. You're beautiful, you know? And that compliment, taking and receiving that compliment, gives you the capacity to later give it to somebody else. You know, it reminds me of a quote that I really love. It says like, children who do not receive care and love are less likely to, in the future as adults, be able to give care and love. And so it's very important that we set people up for success and we reinforce those positive relationships and those positive ways of relating with one another, because it creates those neural pathways in our head and patterns that we can recognize and see in others and be able to express it in the most natural and authentic way. And it makes it less hard for people to change, you know, in the future, especially if they've learned it in the past and it's just reawakening something they've already known before and just reminding them of who they are. You are a good person and you care about other people. You like to give compliments, you know, you like to recognize the humanity of others. You like to be of service and helpful to others, you know. And then all they need to do is just remember every day is the opportunity. Every chance that you can find, there's an opportunity for you to do good and do right by other people. And then it's a karmatic retribution of time, you know. It's either good karma or it's bad karma. It will come back to you in the fold as a positive reinforcement to say it was the right thing to do to treat people in that way. And people are going to start treating you right. Why? Because you've already established in the energetic field of your person that you're receptive to that and that you will give positive response for it. People will see that in you, see that that's something that you accept and tolerate. They'll be able to give you more of it. It reinforces that it's something that they can give in themselves when you receive it. And then it becomes this like bringing back and forth, you know, this is the right thing. This is how you treat people, you know. And to tie that back, I really think that if we took that type of sense of, you know, recognizing that others are real, a real person that matters, and doing right by them, by respecting them, especially right now, the TSA workers, man, not getting paid. I heard on another like news report that I was listening to, somebody saying like, just be patient with them and say thank you. Because it may not solve for the fact that they don't have pay right now, but man, it makes it so much easier. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for understanding. Because man, this is hard. And that might be more priceless than pay for that person, because they could go home at the end of the day and say, I'm so glad I was there to do my job today. I really am, because I was able to get that recognition from people who just understood. And they weren't about like trying to be mad at me for not doing my job fast enough and it's a burden on their lives, but they just understood, man, we're all in this together. And you're doing the best you can, and you're seen, you're valued, you're appreciated, you know. And that could be enough